What am I going to talk about? Whales, maybe, huh? What a spectacular day. Just quickly, we saw 3 species of whales and 4 species of seal today. Just an extraordinary time today. I'll just speak about the whales quickly. This is the minke whale that was hanging out around the back of Half Moon, staying around in that channel, probably feeding. He was there with me all day when I was out there on the point, keeping me company. Wonderful thing to see. And then, of course, we have the fin whales. This is what we would call a surface active group, or SAG. So this represents probably 2 males chasing a female who does not want to be chased. Their speed was extraordinary, going up to maybe 15, 16, 17 knots. At one point, our ice pilot, Captain Biane, was really having a hard time keeping up with them. So it was quite extraordinary to see that. And then, of course, we have our humpback whale. There were several in the area. We managed to get a tail. Don't forget that we are looking for really good shots of tails. This is the shot that we have from our cameras, but if you've got a better tail, I want to see it. Not going there. What we will do is sometime later during this trip, myself and Kirsty and Rachel will arrange an afternoon in the observation lounge, probably, where we'll invite you to come up with your memory cards, and we'll see what you have. And Rachel has already christened this whale Oreo. So there you go. We saw Oreo the calf there. Also wonderful. So a really, really, really good day for whales. Today, though, I'm going to answer a question that a lot of you had on the beach when we were down there by that whalebone. Just how old can whales grow? It's a really interesting question. It's one that we've only just recently been able to get really good inroads into as scientists. There are 4 basic methods which I'm going to go through today, and they range from the kind of simple, almost like count the rings in a tree that you see here type method, through to much more complex chemical methods as well. So some of you today are on the beach. If you got to see me showing you the skull, you would have seen how I was showing you the ear canal, which goes from the outside of the animal to the inner ear. Now, surprisingly, that ear canal is not functional. That's not how sound gets from the outside of the whale to the ear. So how does sound get from the outside of the whale to the ear? We don't know. It's one of these weird things we don't know. But the ear canal itself is completely blocked with wax. Earwax. But it turns out that earwax is laid down in layers on a yearly basis. And so back in the olden days of whaling, if you wanted to age your whale, you could dissect your waxy plug and count the rings and get an estimate. Well, by doing that, we started to guess that whales might be, I don't know, maybe 35 or 40 years old when we killed them. So, okay, that's a pretty old animal. The next method to come along was photo identification. And I'm very proud to say I now work at the very college where an undergraduate student discovered that if you take a photograph of the underside of a whale tail, it was specific to that individual, and it was a fingerprint. And if you manage to get it as a calf, like we did today, and then recite it and recite it and recite it every year, submitting new photographs, you can get the age of a whale. And that is an ongoing process, because we continue now to photograph whales that we had back in the 70s and the 60s. So the whales continue to get older. So for the photo identification method, we're now guessing humpbacks, for example, may last maybe 60 or 70 years. So the age estimate has gone up. A third method, which just happened in the last 5 years, is looking at types of human technology and dating them. So for example, this is a photo from the Inuit whale hunt of bowhead whales up in Alaska. A couple of years ago, a US wildlife fisheries officer was privileged enough to be invited on one of those hunts. So he was present when they cut up the whale and they discovered a harpoon in the animal. Now, that harpoon was not something like this, which dates back to, say, the 1900s. it was actually much more aboriginal in nature. More like this guy here. The last time that kind of technology had been used to kill a whale was over 100 years ago. So this whale that they killed had had a previous attempt at being whaled over 100 years ago, had survived, and then had gone on to finally be killed in around 2013 or so. So that whale was then dated at 130 years ago. And all the scientific community went, yeah, right. Maybe someone got out Grandpa's harpoon and tried to kill the whale. Since then, we have managed to date this with this method successfully at 130, 150, 170, and 213 years is the record right now for bowhead whales. Now that doesn't mean all whales grow to be that long, age that long, but still, it just shows the potential is there. And the reason that we don't have whales that old right now is simply because we killed them all. The whaling process tends to take out the larger animals, which are the older animals. So it's going to take another 50 or 60 years before we see those great-great-great-grandmas and grandpas back in our ocean again, the really, really old animals. So this fact was out there for a couple of years, and finally someone figured out an even better way to do it, which involves looking at amino acids in the eye after death, because amino acids decay in a particular way. The technique is called amino acid racematization. It's a complicated technique, and it confirmed at that point that whales could be at least 100 years old. So we now know that we're working with animals that could be very, very old indeed. So then, if you look at a growth curve of these animals, so on the x-axis here we have age, and on the y-axis we have length. You can see how they grow fairly quickly when they're young, and then at around 50 to 75 years of age they stop growing, and this is our maximum data point here. That's our 213-year-old whale. So they are extraordinarily long-lived, probably. So then how old was our whale that we saw today? This is a photograph I took on a slightly sunnier day at half moon, but of that very same whale jawbone that I got some of you to hug. I hope you can take those photos back with you. We now know that blue whales might grow up to be around 100 years old, maybe older. And we also know that this was a really big blue whale, because that jawbone is absolutely huge, and there are ways to use the length of the jawbone to guess the length of the whale. And if we were to do that, it's about a 100-foot whale. This is one of the big mamas that we had back in the 19th century. We also know that because of the site, that this whale was killed during the South Shetland shore whaling operations, which happened around about the turn of that century, around 1900, 1905, 1910. So, if you start putting those numbers together, so 2016 minus 110 years ago for the shore whaling, minus 100 years for the age of the whale, which is probably a conservative estimate, this whale was probably born somewhere around 1806, which means this whale was born at the same time as this guy. And I'll just leave you with a sobering thought. I know as we get older, our memories are perhaps not as good as they were. But just think about what a blue whale that is 100 years old, what it might remember, especially if, way back when it was young, it remembers the days of whaling. And now, as an old animal, it sees these giant ships coming towards it, seeing it, and just standing by passively and watching the glory of what they do. It's a really sobering thought. Thanks very much.